Santa Claus, St. Nicholas, Kris Kringle. I love Kris Kringle. It's explained because he was an orphan that came over the Stormy Mountain or whatever it is and was with the Kringle family and they were a collection of elves. Not the reason why he's called Kris Kringle. It's even a more bizarre story than that. The story of Santa Claus is not what you think it is. It involves literally chopping little children into meat pies. It involves, but try this one, the Trinity, the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. It's about 325 AD, and there's a guy named Arius who was saying, no, you can't put the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost together. It's not 3 in 1. It's not a Holy Trinity. Well, this was going to split everything apart, and Constantine is the emperor. And Constantine, he knows, he doesn't really care. He just knows if I can keep all the Christians together, I can have a great army. So he calls a council together, a Council of Nicaea. And they all come together. And it's the way Christ would do it. They all had to agree on a certain principle and a certain doctrine. And if you didn't, then they killed you. Santa shows up. But who is this Santa? This man is Nicholas. He was the 151st attendee to sign the Council of Nicaea Register. He hated Arius so much and hated what he was trying to do to the doctrine of Christ that tradition has it that he went into the council chambers and he saw Arius on the top of the stairs and he marched right up to the top of the stairs. He said, "Are you Arius?" He said, "Yeah." He said, I'm going to be someday known as Santa Claus." Grabbed him by the tunic and punched him in the face. That's the real St. Nicholas that no one knows about. The roots of Santa Claus. Kris Kringle, his story. By the year 1100, St. Nicholas was the most powerful saint on the calendar. And he was also the most powerful saint, really, in all of heaven next to the Blessed Virgin Mary. And he had quite a legend going for him in the 500 years after he passed away. He was the actual man, served as a bishop. He was the Bishop of Myra. His name, Nicholas, means people's victory. And that says a lot about him, people's victory, because he was at least the legend of what he did after he died. He was credited with saving sailors at sea that were lost and drowning, and soldiers who were in the midst of battle said that he came and he assisted them. Officials starving children. I mean, you name it. If dogs could talk, by 1100, they had a story about St. Nicholas and how he had saved them. And even during his lifetime, he would come to the aid of anybody who would call on him, even unbelievers, which was a really unique thing back then. Christ isn't going to talk to Jews or Muslims or any of those people. Certainly a saint's not going to either, but he did. And he was known for his compassion and his mercy. And that part of Santa we see. The first part of Santa we see. We don't see the vengeful Santa, the Santa with the whip, at least in America or the West, where he was merciful, but if you were misbehaving, he confronted your misdeeds, which, that part, well, let me tell you a couple of stories. First, story that probably a lot of people have heard, probably the most famous story of St. Nicholas and the legend of him. It's when he's young, he is growing up, he is in a very wealthy family, his parents die, but he has so much love for his fellow man that he finds out that there's a father in town that can't provide a dowry. I mean, it's so bizarre to think of the world that was, but in that time, if you couldn't give a dowry, if you couldn't pay somebody to take your daughter, she couldn't get married to anybody, so we're gonna have to sell her into prostitution. And so this father had no money, so the 3 daughters had no dowry, and each of them were coming to the age of they gotta be married or they're prostitutes. And Dad didn't want to do that. Well, St. Nicholas found out about it, and each night would throw a bag of gold through the window and into the old man's place. So the first night, his first daughter had a dowry. A few weeks later, bag through the window, second one has a dowry. And to save the third one from a life of prostitution, the third. But as he throws it up, the father is now waiting, and he sees him and runs down and says, "Nicholas, I knew it had to be you." And he made the old man promise not to tell anyone, because he said, this deed should only be seen by God and God alone. I don't want the credit. Obviously, the old man said something. If this story is true, that's why St. Nicholas is first the patron saint of maidens in distress, and also for fruitful marriages. Another one of the stories of St. Nicholas is not exactly a story that we want to tell the kids, because Santa all of a sudden is like, Santa was what? And it's not that he was so bad. Well, let me get to it, because remember, he's kind and forgiving, but then he also has the whip. I don't think that's entirely true, because listen, the story goes, Nicholas was an elderly bishop at this point, and 3 boys were sent by their father to visit St. Nicholas for a blessing. But on the way, I mean, this sounds like, we're gonna find the witch in the candy house in the middle of the woods, putting the kids in the oven. But on the way to visit St. Nicholas, they stayed overnight at an inn, and the innkeeper stole their money, then took the boys, and then cut them up and put them in like big stewing pots down in the basement. After cutting them up, he put them in salt tubs, keep the meat from going bad, and was going to make the boys into little meat pies. Who's ready for Christmas yet? Right? Ooh, I feel all warm and cozy. If I could have some hot chocolate, I'm ready to hear more Santa stories. So then Santa comes, St. Nicholas, and he's looking for these boys. And he stops, and he's gonna order some breakfast. And guess what's on the menu? Meat pies. Somehow or another, Nicholas figures out this crime. I don't know, he's like, oh, and one more thing, the boys. He figures it out, and he goes down into the basement, and he finds the boys all cut up. But you will see old engravings of St. Nicholas standing there as the bishop like this, and the boys are rising out of the meat pie containers. Now, here's why I say this is a crazy story. Remember, he's a good guy, but unless you cross him, then he gets the whip. What's the end of this story? He forgives the innkeeper and tells him, don't do that again. And in fact, blesses the innkeeper in saying, oh, by the way, your barren wife, she's gonna have a baby, and it's gonna be a baby boy. So maybe you can make your own meat pie children. I mean, where's the whip? I mean, if there's a time that you're like, hey, Santa, maybe you should pick up the phone, at least call for an investigation, you would think that would be it, but. After he dies, Nicholas, his legend really starts to grow. 1087. This is 7 centuries after he's dead. The physical remains of all of the saints become very, very important. They're prized by the church. In fact, I think all altars in Catholic churches still have relics, a stone of some sort of relic in all of the altars. And this was a really big deal because relics in those days were known for their wonder-working material, if you will, and their powers. And so what would happen is your church would want a really great relic of a really great saint because people would travel from all over for the healing power, the miracle power of that bone or whatever it is from the saint. So St. Nicholas is dead, but he's known as doing all kinds of crazy miracles after he's dead. So, of course, somebody wants his bones. So they go in the middle of the night and steal all of St. Nicholas's bones. And visitors were coming from everywhere to his burial site, even after the town of Myra, which he was the bishop of, was overrun by Turks. Some Catholics thought that it was horrible that St. Nicholas, his bones were in a land ruled by infidels, and Italian merchants wanted to move his relics to Italy because of the trade, and so they did. And Nicholas had a huge legend in the Middle Ages. He had stained glass windows, he had hymns sung in his honor. I was in Sweden a couple of years ago and went to St. Nicholas's church, the Church of St. Nicholas, which was magical, really, truly magical. So the gifts of the Spirit and the gifts of Nicholas started to become combined now with the gifts given at Christmas. Except the earliest Christmas was, I'm glad I didn't live in the Middle Ages. The Dark Ages sounded like a real bummer, kids. Don't want to live there. It was more like Halloween. You were told to go and knock on doors in groups and demand your gift from that house. And if they didn't have a gift for you, demand it and threaten. In the spirit of Jesus Christ, of course. That's the craziest Christmas custom, and that's what it was. It wasn't until the 1100s that a bunch of French nuns got together and they're like, oh, I don't know, this seems a little wrong. And they got together and said, you know, maybe we should learn about St. Nicholas, who would give gifts to people like he did with the 3 maidens. And maybe what we should do is we should secretly leave presents at houses of poor children on December 5th. Not 25th, December 5th. Back in the day, it wasn't a person's birthday, at least a saint that you celebrated. it was his everlasting birthday, his death day. And so they said in France, let's go and leave gifts for poor children. Yes. It doesn't put me in the Christmas mood, like going and threatening my neighbors unless they give me some free stuff, but okay. So that's where the first presents and why it was connected to St. Nicholas. And they would say that St. Nicholas, because you weren't supposed to tell anybody who gave the present, so you said that he would come down the chimney, or sometimes he would come alone, sometimes he would come with companions. He would leave gifts in stockings and shoes, anything by the fireplace, by the window, or by your bed. And there was no sleigh at the time. They didn't have a sleigh. He had a donkey at the time. Sometimes he would walk or fly by himself, just with his coat and fly. But usually it was by a donkey without any kind of magic. I mean, it was 1100. They didn't have a lot. So the gift-giving custom starts from France and spreads through Germany and Holland, and then St. Nicholas markets sprang up. You know, everybody's got to make a buck. This is still 11 or 1200. Now these markets are out, and they're like, hey, you can buy your St. Nicholas toys and treats to give out. Middle Ages. And they still have the capitalist spirit in them. When anybody says to you, hey, this has become too commercial, it's been commercial since like 1159. So St. Nicholas is all warm and fuzzy. Kind of. And maybe they had to do this to the children back then. Maybe they had to say, hey, there's a big evil monster coming for you, because they were beating up the neighbors for Christmas gifts. I don't know why, but it wasn't just the switch in the stocking or an empty shoe. What would show up with St. Nicholas if you weren't a good boy? Kids, you'll listen to Mom and Dad for the rest of your lives when I tell you what's coming next. So I always thought gifts came from the gold, the frankincense, and the myrrh. But no, that's actually pretty modern. The gifts came from the nuns in France to try to get people from threatening the neighbor kids. Well, this happens for a while, and everybody is pretty cool with it. And Christmas becomes a really big deal up until the 1500s. In the 1500s, the Protestant Reformation happens. And the reformers there, they get all serious about God and everything. And we should stop with all this saint stuff and this witchcraft kind of things and all these crazy traditions like this. So it was really kind of getting out of control. And the reformers thought, wait, how come this person has more power than this person in heaven? This whole saint thing is falling apart. And so they started pulling down all of the statues and the saints, and customs were changed. But Nicholas was popular. And I mean, imagine getting rid of Christmas as we know it now. That would be pretty hard to break. So the church knew they had to replace this guy with this guy. But this guy, I mean, I don't mean to be blasphemous here at all. This was really the discussion at the time. How's a little baby gonna drag a bag of toys up the chimney to give it to kids? They didn't have a lot of imagination. But so how are they going to get the Christ child, or as they said in Germany, Christkindl, Kringle is the distortion of Kris Kindle, so this is the original Kris Kringle. It means Christ child. And because he was so small, they would dress little girls up in all white, and little girls would drag a bag of toys around. I mean, it got crazy. It got crazy just to get rid of Santa Claus and replace him with Kris Kringle, the Christ child. It didn't, I mean, it had a problem because nobody really wanted, I mean, Jesus, he wouldn't be bringing toys, and then he had to have these creepy little assistants that would come with him. Then sometimes they would dress these little girls up, and then they'd dress other little kids up, and they would go along. So it was a pack of these, you know, I mean, every like horror movie has, you know, la, 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 la. All those little spooky kids singing. That's what it was like at Christmas in the 1500s. So that really kind of fell apart, but they understood that they needed to teach, that Santa needed to teach about good and bad and Christ. And so if you thought the little girls all dressed in white dragging around toys was a little creepy, what the Santa people did was they came up with ogres that would follow Santa, St. Nicholas. And they would be in chains and rods and whips. And it was like, Jacob Marley. That part of this is, if you look this up, go look up Krampus. And you're gonna find that stupid movie that came out. But read some of the stories of Krampus. What the legend of Krampus is for all of those bad little boys and girls. If you didn't just relieve to switch or coal, Krampus would drag you to hell. And he was this creepy look, you should see some of the old etchings of him, this creepy looking, long-fingered ogre that would come with Santa, and Santa would be like, oh, I was gonna leave a toy here, but Krampus? So he dragged the little kids into hell with them if they had misbehaved. I'm glad we got rid of that tradition with Santa. That didn't go over well either for a while. Krampus went away and all the other ogres, and then Santa entirely went away, at least in some Protestant countries. The Calvinist version of Christianity began to take hold, and Christmas itself was in trouble. Christmas was about to be abolished. In fact, our founding fathers, the Puritans, when they came over, they were the dissenters who pushed the Church of England to become more Protestant. And one of the biggest problems our founders had and our pilgrims had was Christmas. And they associated it with the early Catholic Church. And they said there's nothing in the Bible about a celebration of Christmas or his birthday. Only 2 of the 4 Gospels even mention it. So it's not something that we're supposed to be observing as an important day. And the other reason to abolish Christmas was that people would get drunk and they'd become immoral, and it was just nothing but people Xeroxing their butts at Christmas parties in the old days, you know. And so they abolished it. The Scandinavians and the Germans started to come in, and that brought some of their customs in, but it was very offensive. In fact, the first state to declare Christmas a legal holiday, think of this, was Alabama. 1836 is the first time that Christmas is really celebrated in America. But what happened to Santa? Do you know the story of the legend of Sleepy Hollow? where the headless horseman rides, he throws his head, and I don't remember the exact cartoon, and I don't think I ever read that. But the guy who wrote that was Washington Irving. He also wrote Rip Van Winkle, a great American storyteller. Sinterklaas is Dutch. And I always know Sinterklaas because I think that is what the little girl says on the lap of Santa Claus in Miracle of Sinterklaas, and he starts speaking Dutch to her. Sinterklaas, brought over by the Dutch, the Norwegians, Scandinavians, they come over with Sinterklaas, and we again, like Kris Kringle, we mangle it in America. Sinterklaas, Santa Claus, probably would have completely disappeared if it wasn't for the New York Knickerbockers. Knickerbocker was a nom de plume of Washington Irving. He's, I think, 24 years old, and he starts to write the book, The History of New York from the beginning of the world to the end of the Dutch dynasty. And it's a comedy, it's a spoof, it's a parody of history. And in it, he depicts St. Nicholas flying in a wagon over New York City, climbing down chimneys to give children presents on December 6th, St. Nicholas Day. Irving and fellow members of the New York Historical Society were interested in developing a distinctly American folklore and heritage. And that's why he wrote Rip Van Winkle, that's why he wrote Legend of Sleeping Hollow, and he writes this. Not a lot of people know about this book. Getting an original pamphlet of this book will cost you thousands and thousands of dollars. You could pay $5,000 for a book that is 100 years later than this original publishing. It was widely read, and Santa Claus would not have made it had it not been for that unknown book. In fact, in 1835, the St. Nicholas Society of New York, which was started because of this, said without Washington Irving, there would be no Santa Claus. But it's not Santa Claus that we know. If you look at the pictures after that publication in America, Santa still looks like St. Nicholas. He's still an aristocrat. He is still in the robes of a bishop. And the kids are still crying at the fireplace. You see in one picture of them on the mantle, and one's crying because he got sticks, and the other's happy because he got stuff in his stocking. And that is the first printed image of St. Nicholas or Santa Claus in the Americas. He's still a Catholic bishop. Remember, Catholics are not popular at this time in America. In fact, the Washington Monument had to be stopped during the Civil War, and it was actually being contested on whether they would even finish it or not, because they said it was a big a papal scam, and the Catholics were trying to get everybody in to the Catholic Church. I mean, the anti-Catholicism movement at the time was pretty intense. So how did we get Santa? 1822, Clement Clarke Moore. In a poem that all of us know, we all know, "'Twas the night before Christmas and all through the house." But there's a couple of lines in here that are really important. This was first published in Troy, New York, in the New York Sentinel. And it was published anonymously. And let me just give you a couple of things here that you probably never even knew. For instance, what did Santa look like? What did Santa look like? How did Santa get down the chimney? Now, we have all kinds of stories that tell us, oh, he's got magic powers and he shrinks in size, or he makes the chimney bigger, or whatever. We've seen all of it. The answer is in this poem. And it changes St. Nicholas from the Catholic bishop into something that everybody can relate to, a jolly old elf. I throw up the shutters and the sash, give the luster. What to my wondering eyes should appear but a miniature sleigh and 8 tiny reindeer. I didn't ever realize that he meant miniature, that Santa was about this tall, that there was a miniature sleigh and 8 tiny reindeer with a little old driver so lively and quick we knew in a moment it must be Saint Nick. He goes on to say that, and this is really important, as I drew in my head and was turning around, down the chimney Saint Nicholas came with a bound. So here's this little elf, boom, coming down the chimney. First time that had really happened like that. Nobody could explain it before that. He was dressed all in fur from his head to his foot. Really important line historically. And his clothes were all tarnished with ashes and soot. Why is that important? Because look at the bishop. The bishop is in beautiful regalia. I mean, he's in beautiful vestments and garments. He's just in fur. And it's not really this. It's not like, I mean, this is still kind of, I mean, that's what people wore. They would take skins of animals, especially if you were poor. So he was saying that he's not a bishop. He's not part of the elites. So Clement Moore was saying, he's not any of those people. He's just like you. He's poor. He makes his own clothes out of the animal skins, and he's not like you because he's an elf. And then for this, his clothes were all tarnished with ashes and soot, a bundle of toys on his back, his eyes, they twinkled, dimples, how merry, blah, 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 and a stump of a pipe he held tight in his teeth. Why is that important? A stump of a pipe he held tight in his teeth. Because if you were one of the elites, you would have one of those fancy pipes. And, oh yeah, and your pipe, your bowl of your pipe would be out here, and that big, long pipe would be. What the elites had were the big pipes. But some people were so disgusted by the elites, and I can't imagine this ever. I mean, who would be disgusted by the New York elites? Not a lot has changed, kids. What they would do is the regular people would be so disgusted by those pipes that they would actually break the pipe. They were clay pipes. They'd break that part off, and then they would hold it real close just to say, I ain't any of you fancy pants people. This is the image of Santa Claus. This was the beginning of the Christmas holiday. 'Twas the night before Christmas. Changed everything. Now we have the story. And we have the image, but there's so much of that image that I didn't even recognize. I mean, the little stub of a pipe, and I know that there's got to be San Francisco parents that are reading that, and they're like, I'm going to leave the smoke in a wreath part out because smoking is so unhealthy. It's an important part of the story. So we have these conflicting images. Nobody has brought them together until we find a little boy that was born in Germany and moved to New York. He emigrated with his parents when he was 6 years old. He's 22 years old now, and he makes his first drawing in the middle of the Civil War of Santa as we now know him. January 3rd, 1863, Harper's Weekly, Santa in Camp. And you see him with his, fur-lined reindeer, drawn sleigh, and he's handing things out. He's dressed in an outfit in this one, in the red, white, and blue and the stars and stripes, and he's handing things out to all of the troops. Well, this is the first time that America is now seeing, oh, wow. And he's dangling a jumping jack that is made to resemble Jefferson Davis. So he's giving a present and making a statement at the same time. But in the same issue, there's a second drawing that shows a mother praying for her husband who is away for war, and she's praying by the bedside of her sleeping children, and the homesick soldier is away and he's looking at portraits of the loved ones he left behind. And above, up at the top, is the fur-clad Santa Claus descending to the chimney to fill the stockings of the kids. And you see him speeding by a row of Union tents and throwing presents from the sky. A few years later, 1864, he does another one, the Christmas furlough, and then the Union Christmas dinner. And this is Harper's Weekly, and Thomas Nast in particular becomes very important. Harper's Weekly is the one that came up with the donkey for the Democrats, the elephant for the Republicans. Uncle Sam is created by Harper's Weekly. And in 1869, Santa Claus and His Works are debuted. And this is the first time we see the North Pole. This is the first time we see the list. This is the first time that we get all of these. And I love this fact. That's not a suit he's wearing. That's fur underwear that he's wearing. And I gotta tell you something. If I had fur-lined underwear, that's all I'd wear around the house too. I'd put a big belt around it and walk around in my fur-lined underwear. And I would eat as much as Santa, because I wouldn't really care what the chicks thought of me. I had fur-lined underwear. I'm just saying. So by the end of the 1800s, we have Santa talking on the phone. We have kids, images of, writing letters to Santa. By World War I, Santa is now known all throughout Europe, all throughout America. It really, the Civil War really cements the image of Santa as a figure of reconciliation, of a figure of bringing the family together, no matter if they were on the other side, and bringing them together and uniting for the Christ child and the day before the birth of the Christ child. That's why some people open their presents on Christmas Eve, and then Santa comes at night, and you're supposed to just have the stocking, and you open up whatever he left for in the stocking, and then the rest of the day is holy. But the Civil War cemented that, and then World War I and World War II, we have Father Christmas, we have Pierre Noel, or Père Noel. I don't think it's Pierre, it's gonna be like, pissed off French Santa? I am not leaving you stuff in your dirty little stockings. I'm a Frenchman. No, I think it's Père Noel, not Pierre Noel, but could be just me. I think maybe we're back in the 1500s. I think at this point of the story, we have gone full circle back to the little Christmas villages that were popping up, and we're trying to sell everybody everything, because by 1920, Norman Rockwell has already done a Santa. The most famous Santa is probably the Coca-Cola Santa. This was a guy, Haddon Hubbard Sundblom, I think was his name. Rolls right off the tongue. And he's an artist who, it's 1930 and we're in the Depression. He's looking for some way to capitalize on this Santa thing. So he makes this beautiful illustration of Santa like this. And you've seen it a million times. But he sold it to a company without anything here. They went in with another artist later and painted in the bottle of Coca-Cola with the logo. And he becomes famous for making this Santa. Nothing's changed. He's just a little fatter, which, don't you wish you could be Santa and just be cool with the fatness thing? Just be like, yep, I'm as big as a house and I love it. And I get the chicks, I get all the fame, I get the glory. Little guys are doing all the work and I'm not huffing, I'm just cool with my fatness. That's the way to live your life. I think that's the real message of Santa. But it actually was kind of the message of Sundblom's image of Santa, because he starts pumping these Santas out. And because it's Coca-Cola and it's the Great Depression, he's made him more fat, which people were starving. He has also put him in luxurious furs, not like the fur of Clement Moore, but now opulence, okay? It was the opposite image of the Great Depression that was driving this. And he also made him a guy who would raid your refrigerator. You know, some of the ads were with Santa opening up the refrigerator, like getting caught taking a Coke out. And one of their ads was, I think, I give and I take, or something like that. And so he was impish. He was stealing your food and leaving you something in exchange. We don't know, and I don't think there's any real evidence that this is where we started leaving the cookies for Santa, but that is about the time where Coca-Cola was leaving ads where the kids were leaving the Coca-Cola out for him. It's a long way from Coca-Cola to Kris Kringle. But maybe we need just a little bit more of Kris Kringle and the real understanding of what that name means to root us back to where we belong. Christ child.